Thank you, everybody. Nice to see a lot of you I've seen again and some new faces, so good to see everyone here. Before we get started, I do want to introduce our Chief Financial Officer, Hilary Spence, is in the room.
Hi.
So pleasure to have Hilary here. She joined us 2 months ago, 3 months ago, very recently.
7 weeks.
7 weeks, a long 7 weeks. So thanks for braving the winter snow and coming here to out to our venue. I landed this morning. I'm from Minneapolis. So I plowed up my driveway last night, 6 inches of snow to come here to go see snow. So it's nice to see everyone has come out. So very big news. Some of you saw the press release. I did a couple of interviews. I won't be necessarily repeating all the information from those press releases and the interviews. Hopefully we'll give you a little bit of different color of what does this data mean for the company and where's the company going. Some of you know the company fairly well and some of you may be a bit new. I just want to give you a little bit of a grounding of what the company is and what we do. We're in the regenerative medicine space. And what does regenerative medicine mean? It is a branch of the industry, of the medical industry, that's focused on regenerating and regrowing tissues. So we show here a perfect example of, in the past, last 50, 60 years, if you had knee disease, cartilage disease, and your knee gets worn down, ultimately that has to be a knee replacement. Metal and plastic, where there was good cartilage before, gets diseased, you have to replace it. So in the field of regenerative medicine, what if we could regrow that cartilage so that you don't have to have a knee replacement ultimately? That's what we're trying to get to. Whether it be cardiovascular tissues, bone growing, skin regenerating, organ regenerating, there's a huge market and a huge opportunity and a lot of science behind how can we regrow diseased tissues. That's where the future is coming. And I say the future, but it's not scientific. It's not science fiction, I should say. It is here and it is now. There are products out there that regenerate tissue, and we're going to talk about one of them today. So today, it's new and now, is we have the ability to regrow, in certain instances, cartilage that will hopefully prevent, ultimately, this knee disease and a total knee replacement down the road. So for those of you who don't know Collagen Solutions, we have two parts of the business. The one part is a core business, and it's supply, development, and manufacturing of tissues, collagen, and other products for regenerative medicine. So we have, on the one hand, collagen, and we also have tissues. That's what we do today. That's our core business. In addition to our core business, we have a pipeline of proprietary products. The first one we're going to talk about today, it's this ChondroMimetic product for addressing knee cartilage. We also have a proprietary product in the pipeline for bone regeneration in the spine, and another one for helping to heal hard-to-treat wounds that are a complication of diabetes. So again, core business, nearly all of our revenue today is out of the supply, development, and manufacturing of collagen and tissues into medical device, and then regenerative medicine proprietary products in the pipeline. So how do we grow our business? On the core business, it's about building a stable of customers with recurring revenue. We call them sticky revenue because once it gets into the supply chain, it's very hard to swap out, and they tend to be very consistent long-term customers. As our customers grow, as they launch products into new markets, or they launch our products that we're developing, we grow along with that customer. And then we're also growing the core business by some new technologies, new geographies, and expansion within that core business. Our USP, or our value proposition, is a number of things. We have a tremendous breadth of offering within tissue and collagen. We have expertise and collaboration. This is what comes through loud and clear in our voice of customer surveys, is the level of collaboration, the level of expertise that Collagen Solutions provides translates into lower risk of getting our customers' product to market, quicker time to market, more creative solutions because of our breadth of offering and our expertise. And then finally, our quality and regulatory package, as well as our products. So all of our collagen is sourced from Australia and New Zealand, which is considered the gold standard of quality for tissues. So you take all of those together and no one does what we do. We are highly focused in this tissue and collagen space, and we're highly focused on this high level of quality and collaboration with our customers. On the proprietary product side, As we develop and launch these products, our plan is to launch with partners and other distribution agencies. We don't plan to build a large 100-person sales force to go after the market. It's about partnering with these same customers we're developing products with. But these are partners who want something further down the road, further up the value chain, so they can have it a bit de-risked. They don't have to develop it. We've developed it, and we can now partner with these customers. So that's our business. Our core business, which is this core group of recurring revenues, and then using that same technology, leveraging it into proprietary products. That's our business in a nutshell. So just to describe, before I get into the exciting part of the knee, just to describe what is our core business, how does that work? So it is a long sales cycle, and I think that's important to understand. I mean, these are multi-year processes to get customers on board. It starts with prospecting, understanding customer needs, a bit of negotiation, but this could take 6 to 12 months to really understand what is a customer trying to develop? Do we have the right solution for them? What are their timelines? Doing some initial prototypes even for them, or some proof of concept. So that's a long process because they have to make the right choice, and often they don't know exactly what they need, and we help them. That's where our collaboration value comes in. And then we'll go into a full project, and this can take another 12 to 24 months. We'll develop a dental membrane, we'll develop a bone graft, and we'll develop a custom formulation of collagen or tissue. And then it goes into a regulatory period. We may be still selling them some products or services during that while they're building up inventory or not. And then they go through their regulatory process. We're also helping them through with the right documentation, answering questions with the regulators. And then they launch the product. So this could take a good 2, maybe even 3 years to go through that process from cradle to grave. But the important thing is, once you have that customer, imagine that customer now switching and going all the way from scratch and doing that all over again, and then refiling with their regulatory agencies. They're not going to do that. It's as long as we're providing a good value for our customers, those customers will stick with us for the long term, not just because of the value we provide, but really the switching costs involved. And if you look at our investments, say, in the commercial organization and our efforts, in 2016, we only onboarded 3 new customers, and that took a lot of work. In 2017, that went to, and these are all fiscal years, excuse me, this was 9 new customers. And then in the first half of this fiscal year, 8. So we're seeing this geometric expansion of customers that we're onboarding. So if you tie that with a long sales cycle and seeing where it's happening, you can kind of get an idea of where do those revenues then come down the road and where does it hit. And that's the important leading indicator for us, are the number of new customers of quality that we're bringing on board, and then the projected revenues from those customers. And that's why we feel very excited about what the future of Collagen Solutions looks like. A number of shots on goal within our core business. I mentioned the business-to-business commercial team that we've built in the organization. We are expanding geographically. We just did a press release out in China where, after successful import permits onboarding, we brought on a new partner to help us with that next step of next layer distribution in China. Certainly our near-term customer launches as they come out and they get new approvals to launch. And then finally, the tissue business has been expanding, which is very nice. In fact, we just tripled our tissue. We've been capacity constrained in our tissues. We've been able to triple this. And then what we're also seeing is our customer breadth is opening up, as well as the type of tissues that we're being asked to produce, which is very interesting. Just as an anecdote, the other day, we got a request for blood products. And again, it's not a major change for us. It is our value proposition is providing tissues from a cow. That's what the customer needs. Our quality systems, our logistics is all wrapped around it. If they need a different tissue, it's a very simple way of getting with the abattoir, training on a slightly different process, and harvesting. So we've been selling pericardium, which is our bread and butter, but also bone, tendon, blood vessels, and other tissues. So that business has real potential as well. So what that translated in is to some steady growth over the years. You'll see that it is typically back-end weighted. We have a bit of seasonality within our business where the back half is usually bigger than the front half, but we've seen this nice steady growth of revenues over the years. And now we're at, like I said, the last fiscal year is just over £4 million. So that's just a bit of a grounding. That's about what we'll talk about, the core business and what we do and overall. The really exciting thing is if you think back to the second phase of our business is this proprietary products. meaning these custom products with our own intellectual property that will take all the way through regulatory approval and then start getting into clinic. And the first of these is ChondroMimetic. So I'll talk a little bit about what is ChondroMimetic. So it's an arthroscopic procedure. The product itself is placed arthroscopically and it comes in a full kit. So what does arthroscopic mean? Overseas, or in Europe, it's often called keyhole surgery. And the reason they call it keyhole surgery is there's just 3 small incisions if you're looking at the front of a knee here. You have a camera, a very small camera that comes in, and you have 1 or 2 instruments that also come in from the side, and the surgeon is actually looking at a TV screen. They're not even looking at the knee. They're looking at a TV screen and very minimally invasive procedure, manipulating the procedure so that when the patient wakes up, there's 3 small stitches or 3 small holes that have been stitched up, and then a rehab protocol. So this particular ChondroMimetic device is through this keyhole surgery procedure. The implant itself is shown right here. It's meant to replace a defect in cartilage, and I'll get into what that means, but it's in the knee. When you have early arthritis, you have a defect, this implant can then replace that defect and regrow cartilage over time. And that is a tremendous statement, and it's a tremendous technology that literally has been over 20 years in the making. I'll walk you through a little bit of the history of it. This is the actual product that regrows, and it comes in a small kit, and you can see the tools. These are fully disposable, so it's very simple. It's all preloaded, and it goes through an existing procedure. Now, what's important about this is it's only 1 surgery, and I'll get into why that's important. It's highly cost-effective relative to other therapies that have similar data, and it's backed by 8 years. Now, this is what we're announcing, 8 years of clinical data. This is almost unheard of in the cartilage world, and I'll talk a little bit about why that's important. But this is the biggest differentiator. Arthroscopic keyhole is nice, cost-effective is nice. 8 years is really the most difficult thing to achieve because it just takes time to do it. So let's backtrack a little bit. What disease are we treating? So this is, you're looking at basically the bottom of your knee, the femur. This is the top part of you're looking at the underside of the knee. And this is what healthy cartilage looks like. So you're looking straight on, you see nice shiny cartilage, and this is what the knee rubs against the bottom of the knee, called the tibia. And it gives some good cushioning, some good wear and tear. It's like a ball bearing. That's the best way to say it. It's highly lubricated, very structured, meant to last a lifetime, often doesn't. So what happens early on, and this is typically you'll get a spot, maybe a 1 or 2 centimeter in diameter spot, and that could be through trauma. You can have an injury. Maybe early on you've heard of tearing your ACL or tearing your meniscus. So you get a little bit of a wobbly or laxity. And that can rub, and that instability can cause some problems. Could be other reasons for disease progression, but that starts to get very painful over time. If left untreated, or even if treated, the progression can be late osteoarthritis. Osteo meaning bone, arthritis is arthritis. So that's going right into the bone. Almost all the cartilage is gone. There's very little you can do at this point. There are some treatments available, some of the more expensive treatments, but this is a very challenging situation to be in. In fact, it gets into knee replacement. So that right there is a piece of metal. So when you've gone so far down the road where you can't recover, you're now using metal and plastic, and you've got yourself a bionic knee. And then, although knee replacement is very successful, it does remove the pain, if it doesn't last over time, and typically these can last 10 to 15 years, if you get a knee replacement when you're 60, when you're 70, when you're 80, you're probably doing revisions. And every time you do a revision, you take a little bit more bone out, right? It's a little bit more metal. So that's the progression of the disease. So our goal here is, what if we can stop it here? What would that mean to the healthcare system? Billions of dollars are being spent, not just on the products here, but the limitation activity, the challenges that happens to society by the time you get to this point. So this is all about the regenerative medicine space within orthopedics is about addressing this earlier on. So what are the treatments? What are people trying to do? What are the scientific community trying to do? Well, this is in order of, I would say, invasiveness or aggressiveness. The first stage is what's called debridement, lavage, or injections. So that arthroscopic procedure, cleaning up some of the damage, washing it out, maybe some injections with, there's a product called hyaluronic acid that has some good short-term effects as well. So that's kind of the first stage, maybe even steroid injections to reduce the inflammation. Then you can get into a technique called microfracture. Microfracture is going into this diseased knee, drilling holes, letting it bleed from the bone marrow and scarring over. That will give you a nice little scar tissue, what's called disorganized collagen or fibrocartilage, and that might protect the knee for a while, but not for a long time, maybe 2 to 3 years. The next stage is what we'll call scaffolds, such as ChondroMimetic. These are collagen products or other materials that are meant to regrow the knee, but again, clinical evidence past 2 years, very difficult to find. A lot of these technologies don't show great results at 5 years. Allograft or autograft, allo meaning same species, human cadaver donations, or autograft meaning your same tissue. So you might take cartilage from a good part of your knee and put it into the bad part of the knee. It's a pretty aggressive procedure, but it can work. It does have some challenges. And then finally, cell therapies, where you're taking scaffolds, you're putting cells, multiple procedures, very advanced stem cell surgery, $20,000, $30,000 or euros. Can work, has been shown to work, but it's a very aggressive treatment. It's a very expensive treatment. That I would describe as the current state of what we're going into. So what is the unmet need then? So we talked about all these therapies. Some are cost effective, like lavage and debridement and microfracture, but they don't have the long-term results. Some are single surgery, like the scaffolds, but again, the long-term results may not be there. Some of the cell therapies do have some good long-term results, but it takes multiple surgeries and it's not cost-effective necessarily. These could be, again, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 procedures. So the target, the sweet spot is, can you have something that is good long-term results past 5 years, cost-effective, as well as fits within the surgeon's practice with a single surgery that's nice and simple. So now we get to the clinical study. Can we make some claims about this? Can we prove some of these value points that we're going after? So the first thing we wanted to look at in the study is to demonstrate the long-term durability of this regenerated cartilage. So we've put the scaffold in. We believe it's regrowing tissue. Let's prove it. So we did that. We can do it 2 ways. From a quantitative point of view, how much of that defect are we filling? And from a quality point of view, is the quality of the cartilage we're regrowing the right type of cartilage that will sustain over the long term? And then, is there any clinical benefit to this? So you might have a fully filled defect. The cartilage may look good, but how's the patient doing with their quality of life, with their activities of daily living, with their return to work? Can they do sports? So these are all questions that we asked in this long-term study. So here are the highlights in the summary, and this is similar to what we announced. So first of all, the MRI, so people have heard of going into an MRI, you go to the doctor, it's imaged. We reconstructed that 3-dimensionally through a lab, and what we saw was the cartilage, so this answers the quality question, nearly identical to normal cartilage. So that, after 8 years, that was an amazing result. We were very happy with that. We also saw good fill, and we'll talk about this. Clinically, the patients improved pain, improved function, improved return to work. So all the metrics that we talk about, the quality of life and the clinical outcomes, were very positive. And in fact, when we looked at these clinical outcomes versus some other published papers regarding the more expensive technologies, on an apples-to-apples basis on these same types of clinical scores, we were the same, if not better, than therapies that cost 10 times as much. So we thought, especially for this area that we're looking at, which is the early intervention, we thought this was a tremendous result. So what do the physicians think? So on the left here, we see, or my right, your left, we see Dr. Laszlo Hangoody. Dr. Hangoody is a well-known surgeon based in Hungary. He's been publishing and doing a number of clinical studies with cartilage going back decades. Very well respected and well known within the cartilage community. Very excited. He started this study back in 2009, 2010. Very impressed with the long-term results. On the right is a younger surgeon. His name is Dr. Alan Getgood. Dr. Getgood is from the other London, Ontario, Canada. Very well known among North American sports medicine circuits. Studies, published a number of studies, also very well good at teaching clinically. He did the early animal work for ChondroMimetic with a number of different additives, a number of different trials, and we had him review independently this MRI data, and he was very, very impressed with, these were his words, the quality of the cartilage recreated, especially on the MRI. So I think from two different perspectives, you have a clinician who's been doing this type of cartilage surgery for decades, seeing this as a very compelling opportunity against microfracture, and then a scientific, a more basic science clinician and surgeon being very impressed with the MRI data. So these are two different data points. So just to talk a little bit about the study, this was a study that was initiated in 2009-2010 timeframe. We had 17 patients originally in the study, and it was going to go 6 months. That was the original idea, and it was meant just to show safety. If we implant this, is this a safe product? Is it going to have any adverse events and so forth? When Collagen Solutions came along and ended up acquiring the assets of ChondroMimetic, we got back to the original study coordinator, Dr. Hangoody, and we said, Dr. Hangoody, could you bring any of these patients back? Because this will be tremendous data if we can find some portion of the 17 patients after 8 years. And he said, yes, we can get a lot of them back. I figured we'd get maybe 8 or 10 of them back, but we were thrilled to get 15 patients out of the original 17 to come back. In fact, the only 2 that we couldn't get had left the country, and we couldn't get a hold of them. So very good kind of compliance rate for this long-term data. We finished seeing the last patient in September of last year, and literally about a week ago finally got the final report and finished all the data analysis and to see these data. So getting a little bit into the data, a little bit technical. So again, we're looking at the imaging, which is the 3-dimensional MRI, and then the clinical outcome score. So just a couple of data points. Repair morphology, that's just basically a simple way of saying is, we put this scaffold in, how much of that volumetrically grew into tissue? So if you start with 0%, because it's an implant in a big hole, how close to 100% did we get? And then we also looked at something called T2 mapping, and T2 mapping is a technical term, but it's just taking the MRI data and saying, what kind of cartilage is this? What kind of tissue? Is it scar tissue? So if you 100%, but it's scar tissue, that's not going to do any good. But if it's 100% and it's good quality native cartilage, that's a tremendous outcome. So not just the fill, but also the quality. And then we looked at a number of measures, but the 2 key clinical outcomes, what's this score called the Cincinnati score, and it's just looking at levels of activity among patients. We took that data preoperatively 8 years ago so we can follow it longitudinally. And then there's a new score called the COS, which is an abbreviation for the knee outcome scores. And this is a more modern technique that most cartilage studies, most knee studies, in fact, are reporting, and it looks at 5 very specific clinical outcomes. We felt that was important to add, even though we didn't have it from the beginning. It could then allow us to compare to some of these alternative therapies. So I'll walk through some of the results here. So first of all, on the fill. So the cartoon on the left basically says immediately you have an implant that is between the bone and the cartilage, and it's completely different. Over time, what we saw is 95% of that defect was filled. So to be clear, that's not 95% of the patients. That's in the average of all the patients. 95% of that hole was filled with either bone or cartilage in the right place. And that is a tremendous result. Just to give you an example, microfracture, one of the techniques I showed you earlier, there's a number of published papers out there that suggest that 50%, 60% in a lot of these cases gets filled. This is in the literature about as high as you can get with a cartilage therapy. And you can see the consistency. So these are all 14 patients. One of the 15 patients we could not image because of a technical issue, although we got our clinical scores. But of all 14 patients that we can image, you could see pretty much all of them were well above 90%. So very, very consistent across all the patients. We saw very good filling. So that doesn't tell us how good the cartilage is. It just tells us that we filled the right tissue in the right places. So here's a case study that we included. Some of the earlier presentations, we demonstrated case studies for 6 months. Now this goes out to 8 years. This is a 2-dimensional MRI, and this is the 3-dimensional reconstruction. And you can see this is a patient that had a primary defect. The surgeon put in 2 implants, ChondroMimetic, and at 6 months, you can see regeneration, and you can see it sustained after 8 years. A little bit of wear and tear in general over the knees, that's what happens over 8 years. But the cartilage itself that was regenerated sustained over that 8-year period. So we can see this is very representative of all the patients in our study. The other clinical aspect that we showed is what we call the modified Cincinnati score. So this is over time, how did the patients improve? And what we saw is it started at 64, dipped down a little bit post-surgery because you're in pain after surgery, shot up pretty high, but over time sustained. So over 80 on this score, they call it fair, poor, fair, good, and excellent. Anything over 80 is considered an excellent result. So it's natural over time. You can figure over 8 years of aging, you're going to be a little less active than you were 8 years ago. But what this is showing is that the activity level, that score has been sustained over the long term, over 8 years. And it was a very statistically significant result from the pre-op basis. So from a clinical perspective, that's about as good as you can get, is to have that excellent rating after 8 years. The other score, I talked about the COS scores. So the blue bars that you see here is ChondroMimetic. The gray bars are bars from different data points from different studies. These are cartilage therapies that cost $20,000 to $30,000. So what we're seeing is an apples-to-apples basis, whether it's their symptoms, their pain, their activities of daily living, their sports, and their quality of life. These are all metrics from the study. We can show equal, if not better, than these therapies that cost 10 times as much. So that is the data that we produced. I think I skipped over real quick. What I want to tell you about the T2 mapping is the quality of the cartilage was seen as identical to the quality of the cartilage of the surrounding tissue. So even though the fill was very good at 95%, what we saw is the signal of the cartilage itself was indistinguishable from pristine cartilage in the knee. And we collaborated that with other published studies that also had very similar controls that we actually became better at. So it's in the presentation, but from a quantity of cartilage filled and bone filled, a quality of cartilage filled, and then of course the clinical results, all of these frankly exceeded our expectations on the study. So that's a bit on the study. Now we'll talk about where do we go from here? What do we do with it? So from a market perspective, we think there's an opportunity to address some portion of the 1 million or so cartilage procedures that are done a year. Now, those 1 million procedures aren't total knee replacements where you put in metal and plastic. These are all keyhole surgeons, arthroscopic surgeons that are looking to go in with a simple procedure to repair the knee and get that early intervention, or even in the later stage, to do something before you have to replace the knee. So there's 1 million procedures of there. Our product in particular, we think we can target about 30 to 40% of those based on the size of the defect and the clinical appropriateness. That could expand over time, certainly, as the technology evolves and techniques evolve, but we still think that's a very addressable market. The reason most of these surgeries have not been adopted by any commercial products is the efficacy isn't there, right? So the ones that do have the efficacy, the $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 products that do have 5-year data, those require 2 different surgeries. So imagine bringing the patient back twice for the same surgery, $20,000 to $30,000. The other procedures, microfracture and some of these other ones, don't last past the 2 years. So if you can come up with a product that can address the cost, can address the complexity in terms of the surgeon procedure, and that can show the efficacy, we think we can address a big part of that market. So we do believe there's a $400 million market opportunity out there just in Europe to address once we get this out there. We also just announced a partnership in Korea, and we think there's about a $70 million market there. So again, it's addressing that sweet spot, that unmet need of cost, surgical complexity, and then finally long-term outcomes. So we've got all 3 there. So again, I did mention the partnering opportunity. We did close a deal. We didn't disclose the terms in Korea. Korea is a bit of a smaller market, but it's a very important market because in Asia Pacific, there's a lot of research that happens in Korea with respect to cartilage therapies. And so if you think about it as a hub of thought leadership within the Asia Pacific market, that's a good place to start. That partnership was announced in December. It's a licensing and distribution opportunity. It's going to take some time to get the clinicals and the regulatory. In fact, we're meeting this week with our partners to take the next step in that process, and more will come as that advances. But that was a very important proof of partnership, I would call it, that there are doctors that see the vision, and there are companies that see the vision that want to partner with us. Our next stage is Europe. So we've submitted for the first part of our CE mark. We're going to provide some additional data following these data, the clinical data. And our aim is to find a partner in Europe that will help us commercialize in Europe, whether it be a strategic partner or individual distributors within country. We're speaking to both. We've had some very good discussions with both. In fact, we've had even more exciting discussions with the surgeons in Europe. So there are surgeons who initially used this product around the time of the clinical trial that are excited to see it back, have offered to do some case studies with us of their early patients. And in fact to do even some more studies. So we have seen the excitement and the enthusiasm from the original surgeons that remember this product. At this time, we don't have plans, it's not in any of our models to come to the United States, but I can tell you there are companies like Johnson & Johnson has just started a trial with a partner. Smith & Nephew has just invested as well with the aim to bring these cartilage therapies into the United States. So now that we're seeing the opportunity that's there, that will tremendously open up the $400 million market if these therapies can get into the United States. And that's another upside should we demonstrate some traction and some proof of concept in Europe and Asia. So again, what makes it different? It's a single procedure. So it's via keyhole surgery. It's in the surgeon's existing surgical techniques. There's not a lot of learning curve here. And it's in a preloaded sterile pack, so very simple to use. The single surgery is very important because it's not two-stage. And that's not just important from a surgeon perspective, but from a patient perspective. Any knee surgery is painful. And a lot of patients, even that initial surgery where you're taking a biopsy for the first procedure, they don't want to come back to that second procedure. So from a patient perspective, it's a much easier sell for the surgeons to say, this is a single step rather than two. Health economics, that's very important. Certainly in Europe, it has been for many years. It's becoming much more important in the United States. Asia, there's cost constraints. You have to show improved outcomes for healthcare dollars spent. That's the way value is defined in healthcare, right? Can you have great outcomes and reduce the cost? We think we have the 8-year outcomes to show it, and we're going to be cost effective at 10% of some of these other therapies. And then finally, the 8-year clinical data. That is the compelling differentiator. Very few therapies can show anything past 5 years that are efficacious. And here we not only have it from a clinical perspective, but on the imaging perspective, the T2 data and the MRI to prove that we've got a product that goes past that 5-year criteria. So very few products, certainly not at our cost point, can claim this data. So finally, we do believe the study is very exciting. It does prove the long-term cartilage durability. That is the holy grail. That's what people are looking for, is a product that lasts past 5 years. We saw improvements in the cartilage quality from 6 months to 8 years. We saw cartilage being generated that's nearly identical to the surrounding cartilage, so the quality of the cartilage is there. And then finally, the clinical scores, both from the longitudinal 8-year differentiation and then the comparative COS against competing therapies. So all of those data points are very, very promising. So our next steps are to get this on the market. Certainly we want to get it in Korea now that we have the partner. It's going to take us some time to go through that regulatory process, and we'll have more information on as that progresses. But the near term is to get this into Europe. So we have begun the CE mark submission process. We expect that to continue throughout certainly the spring and into the summer. We still are targeting for the end of this year to be able to do the first clinical, or to have the regulatory, I should say, approval to enable us to do clinical cases. Then also in the partnership, going through the partner discussions. So those are our next steps. Again, it's been a long time coming. Started off just down the street, or up the street, I should say, at Cambridge University about 20 years ago, with collaboration with MIT. Over many years of research, many years of development, and then finally an 8-year clinical study, we're here to really announce the results of all that hard work by many collaborators over decades of research, development, and then finally clinical trial, to have a product that has sustainable, durable cartilage that is proven over 8 years, and we're very excited about that. So with that, we'll end the presentation. Thank you.
Are you able to apply it to other bones with a similar problem in the human body, or would they require a separate regulatory approval?
So technically you can apply it to other areas of the body. In fact, some of the early studies were done, early cases were done, not part of this study, in the foot and ankle. So I'd say the foot and ankle is the second biggest opportunity for this. By far, knee is the biggest right now. The problem in the foot and ankle is same progression. Is you have early arthritis, turns into late arthritis, and specifically it's the top of the ankle called the talar dome, and then the front of your big toe. So people have that bunions. You've seen those big bunions. A complication of that is also it's called the metatarsal. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is to regrow the cartilage there. So this is absolutely applicable to that technology. You might need slightly different surgical instrumentation. So the implant itself is good. You might need you can make it work. From a regulatory perspective, the original CE mark for this product was irrespective of the joint. That's what we're going to be applying for, is the same original labeling. There is a possibility that the regulators may want us to get additional data to prove that, but that our target is for generalized cartilage. The other opportunities may be in the hip. I think that would require definitely some different instrumentation, perhaps a different product, and then potentially the shoulder. But I'd say, order of priority is knee first and foremost, secondarily foot and ankle.
Can you explain a bit the regulatory steps that you need to take in the US if you were to go there?
So for whatever reason, the US is a peculiarity when it comes to cartilage, where it needs full clinical trials, prospective, randomized, et cetera, and that's different than Europe and most of Asia. The process, we had a group that is very expert. In fact, they've gotten cartilage approvals before. Take a look at this and very precisely detailed out what we need. So we are looking at a 200 to 300 patient clinical trial in the United States, randomized against microfracture. So all in, it would be around 200 to 300 patients. The all-in economics of that is between $15 and $20 million to do the study, to do the write-up over time, and it's a 2-year clinical trial. So consider a year to enroll, 2 years to follow, and then another year of submission and review and so forth. So you're probably talking about at least a 4-year process, $15 to $20 million to get there. You do have to, and there is a very specific FDA guidance document for cartilage. What's held back the technology in the United States is, up until a few years ago, 0 cartilage products have ever been approved in the United States using that guidance document. So there's a company, it's an old technology, it's a new company that recently got their flagship product approved. It was one of these cell therapy products just last year. They're doing now about $50 million US. But again, this is getting to your second question. The economics, this product is probably going to be around the $2,000 to $3,000 point. Depending on the exchange rates and so forth over time, you might want, and it's really driven by reimbursement economics. So when I say, if this is $2,000 to $3,000 versus a $20,000 to $30,000 product, that's where I get the 10% figure. The National Institutes or NICE, as part of the NHS, just published a study that their health economic analysis says, if you can have a cartilage therapy that truly avoids total knee and some of these more expensive technologies, they thought the health economic break-even point was 14,000 pounds. So here, we're well under the health economic break point of what the NHS says.
If you were to have a crystal ball, how long could this theoretically last for the patients before they would need to consider another procedure? And could your scaffolding technique be used a second time, say after 12 years, for example?
Absolutely, it could. And I think the putting off, what you're talking about is a delay game as much as possible. If you can delay all the way to never needing it, that's great. That's really the holy grail. I think an easier bar to look at is when people do the microfracture technique. It's one of those earlier stage interventions. There's data there that says within 2 to 5 years after that microfracture technique, 5 to 10% of them are going right to a total knee. So what we've shown here is that just bought you 8 years instead of 2 to 5. So really it's about delaying that. Eventually, if the knee wears out, you might have to get to that point, but you can have multiple surgeries. And it's always a balance of how aggressive do you want the surgery versus how much pain are you in? And you're pushing off that total knee as much as possible. So you can have the second surgery if you ever need to. The data is just not here of, is it sustainable? Maybe to your original question, what about the 15-year results? I think we'll come back in 7 years and figure out what that data point is. But I would just answer it is, we can pretty much show now that we're buying at least 5 years, of a patient's time, of a patient's quality of life. And that's how NHS and these other groups are looking at it from a health economic point of view and an activity point of view. It's about how many quality of life years are you buying?
You mentioned in your presentation Europe, South Korea, and America. What about other regions of the world? How far advanced are you, or are you not in those areas?
We are not advanced at all in those areas, although there's a recent, a similar therapy, one of these two-stage therapies, just announced a deal in Japan where they have 2 or 3 year data. This is, again, is one of those more expensive two-stage cell therapy technologies, but they did the deal for 10 million up front and 80 million in earnout. And part of the reason Japan is very interesting is they have a very aggressive investment and support of regenerative medicine. There's grants out there, there's a regulatory path out there that is much more friendly than it used to be. So if I were to take a guess at what's attractive that we haven't really looked at yet is Japan, because of the new regulations there, and then the willingness of some of these regenerative medicine companies to invest, as we saw in this other deal point.
Are you able to say anything about the sort of type of partner you're looking for, particularly in Europe? Is it pan-European, country by country?
So the type of partner we would be looking for is there's specific countries that we think have the earliest and best use. So we've done the reimbursement homework. UK is fairly attractive, partly because of this paper that I mentioned. Germany, we know there's a clear reimbursement path. We figured it out. Spain, Greece, and some other areas is where this product already was. So we're looking really to say, in the first instance, can they hit these particular countries and do it well and help us with the tender process and the reimbursement process and so forth. So as opposed to pan-European versus specific, it'd be whoever they are, do they have specific reach and expertise in these particular countries that we're most interested in. Having said that, if we could bring on a strategic partner where they're interested in these countries in Europe first, but have the vision to come to the United States and maybe leverage the data and have the cash to do so, that would obviously be very attractive. So we're keeping our options open, I think, at this point, in terms of where are people's willingness to go all the way into the U.S. But the bare minimum is we want specific expertise in these areas where we have surgeon interest, where we have reimbursement and market access, and we already have some traction, frankly, from the original data.
You mentioned Smith & Nephew. I mean, is there a potential partner, or could it be, I don't know, one of your competitors?
Absolutely. In fact, Smith & Nephew has made a number of investments in cartilage, as has Johnson & Johnson, as has Zimmer Biomet. All these companies, they know the hard thing is knowing which product is going to work after 5 years, right? That's you're making bets early, down to 5 years. So, this is why these companies have made multiple investments in multiple therapies. Is the value of a strategic partner is going to be about the channel, about the sales organization, about the marketing behind it. And this is a very complementary surgery to other procedures.
Turning to the nitty-gritty of cash flow, plenty of optimism about where we're going here on in. And clearly, with an E-mark, that gives you further opportunities in terms of generating cash flow, either upfront or otherwise. How comfortable are you that you will realise the final objective without further capital raising?
We're very focused on growing the top line, but equally focused on cash preservation where we need to. So that is continuously on our focus. Is some of the investments that we have made and continue to make are a bit discretionary, and so we can move some things around as we need to. And with Hilary on board as our new CFO, we're absolutely looking at certainly the cash flow projections where we need to go. But it's the same thing I've said, I guess 2 months ago or 3 months ago when I was here, is yes, we're absolutely focused on that exact goal, is to make sure that we can do this while preserving the cash. I don't know if Hilary, if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, just to add to that, our burn rate, you'll be able to tell from the accounts what the burn rate is, but we're confident that we can do enough to refocus some of the resources on areas that will be just provide a better return for the business, restructure a little bit, and generate enough cash to keep us going into the foreseeable future. So I'm not sitting here going, oh my gosh, I'm worried about cash, we're going to have to raise cash in the foreseeable future. Now, having said that, wouldn't it be a really nice thing to be able to do that, to go and do some build and buy? But we're very conscious that what we need to do in the near term is to make sure the business is stable and delivering those new customers and making that pipeline come to life, and getting that share price ticking up the way in the marketplace as it has been for the last kind of week or so.
Again, 8 years in the making, or arguably 20 years in the making, if you think about the professors over at Cambridge that started this. So thanks for your time and attention, and enjoy the evening. Yes.